Israel was commanded to celebrate feasts that would allow them to remember and honor the goodness of the Lord. What traditions in your life remind you of God's goodness? Today's key verse reads, Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus chapter 23, verses 42 and 43. The Festival of Booths is also known as the Feast of Tabernacles, or in Hebrew, Sukkot. This 7-day feast is last of the mandatory feasts mentioned in Leviticus 23 and the last of the 3 required pilgrimages. A time of rejoicing for Israel, the Feast of Booths celebrated at the end of the harvest season and was a reminder to Israel that their God had provided them with everything they needed. Unlike the solemnity of the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Booths was quite joyous. This feast also served to remind the Israelites of the booths or tent-like shelters that they lived in during their wilderness experience. During this period in their history, Israel was not yet a nation, but rather a loose confederation of tribes, moving through the desert under the direction and protection of God. In its homeless condition, Israel was totally dependent on God to protect them from enemies. As in the other feasts, the celebration of the Feast of Booths included sacrifices and offerings to God. Some 70 bulls were sacrificed during the feast, and here we see Israel's reminder of its mission to the rest of the world. Many rabbinical scholars believed the 70 bulls symbolized the 70 nations of the world before the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel. At the covenant instituted on Mount Sinai, Israel had been sanctified or set apart as God's special people. They were to be living witnesses to the existence of the one true and holy God before all the nations of the earth. We must remember that when the temple was built in Jerusalem, the non-Jewish were not excluded. Instead, a special court was built to allow the Gentiles a place in the temple where they could come and be instructed about the God of Israel. There in the court of the Gentiles, the non-Jews could pray to the God of Israel. This is a beautiful reminder to us that our worship of God was never intended to be just private and celebrated for the benefit only of other Christians. Rather, we are to praise and thank God for His goodness for the benefit of the world, the saved and the unsaved. The Feast of Tabernacles is still celebrated by Jews around the world, although few make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem due to the impracticalities of travel. Instead, they often build tents outside their synagogues or in other places in their communities. Christianity has not really continued this festival observance, but the feast can still serve as a reminder and celebration of God's continuing protection and nourishment through rain, sunshine, and healthy crops, as well as through healthy food, homes, jobs, and education for everyone, regardless of whether we live in rural, suburban, or urban settings. In today's lesson, we see that the Feast of Booths, in fact, all of the feasts, were instituted by God. He calls them His own feasts. These days and the Sabbath reveal the purpose of mankind's past, present, and future. The feasts also tell us of Jesus' first and second coming. The feasts are relevant to present-day saints because they are a foreshadowing of God's ultimate plan for us. They also let us communicate the need to set apart special times and days for celebration. As African Americans, we can celebrate how God has carried us through slavery and segregation and gave us freedom. These times and days are important as we give honor to God for His provision and guidance, and also a way for us to connect with friends, family, and fellow believers. Not only does the Feast of Booths remind us of the wonderful provisions that God provided to Israel, the feast also sets the stage for the rest and abundance coming to Israel and all the people of God. Thank you for listening and subscribing to iLights. May the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus.